Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on motivation and decision making. Today, we continue our conversation with Dr. Jacque Eccles. How are you, Dr. Eccles?
Fine.
Yeah. So last time we have been discussing about the expectance value. We discussed about subjective values. We discussed about the cost. So today we are going to talk about how does context shape motivation? How does context shape motivation?
Okay.
So we'll be talking about the culture, the family, and school in your model in straighted expectancy value theory. So as we start, what is context in straighted expectancy value theory? What do you mean when you talk about context?
The place in which behavior occurs. So
Mhm.
that can be a classroom, it could be a playground, it could be a home. So you have to think about context in two ways: the immediate context and the more broad context. So you can think of the broad context in terms of a socialization history. So the history of the individual growing up in their culture, in their family, in their school system. And you can think about um, the immediate situation in which they have to make a decision about behavior.
Mm,
Okay, so let me talk about first about the immediate context. So um, when we talk about motivated behavior, we're talking about behavior that has a purpose.
mm,
So part of what the word motive, to move, is the basis of motivation, and that really means what energizes movement towards a purpose in
mm,
most cases. The purpose doesn't necessarily have to be a conscious purpose, but it is directed behavior that is with some kind of implicit or explicit goal.
mm,
Now, the environments do a lot. The immediate environment does a lot to shape what behavior can happen in a
mm,
given situation at a given point in time.
mm,
So if you're in a classroom, it's very likely that you're going to be looking for cues about how to act in a classroom and what the classroom is likely to stimulate in terms of motivated behavior,
mm,
and or in the family or on the playground. So
mm,
we could think about a child on the playground trying to decide what to do. And in some cases, someone would say, "Come and play ball with us."
mm,
And they would go and play ball. And
mm,
that would be motivated behavior. Whether it was achievement or not is another issue. That would be something about how much the child wanted to either improve their skill level or do better than someone else. So usually achievement behavior, as we've talked about before, has this inherent comparison. Either you're trying to get better, and that's your comparison, or you're trying to do better than someone else,
mm,
which is an external comparison.
mm,
And we know that environments give people cues as to whether or not they're a competitive situation or a cooperative situation, or just a situation in which habits. You do something because it's a habit. I go to school, I sit down, I take out my pencil, and then
mm,
I'm ready. And
mm,
all of that is just habit that one does.
mm,
Now, when teachers talk about motivation or families talk about motivation, they're
mm,
usually talking about how they can get the kids, the
mhm,
students, or the employees, or the players to do what the coach or the teacher or the employer wants done. So
mm,
they're trying to motivate someone. So
mm,
that's another way the term motivation is used. So a lot of people, when they study motivation and they say, well, how does the context affect motivation. They're
mm,
talking more about what are the characteristics in the environment that are likely to support engagement
mm,
or undermine engagement.
mm,
And there's been a lot of work on that. So if we just take a classroom, for example,
mm,
and this would be work by DC and Ryan, they talk more about this than we do in SVET, is that people want to feel connected, they
mm,
want to feel competent, and they
mm.
want to feel like they have some control.
In the self-determination theory?
Yeah, this is self-determination theory. So they would argue that a classroom or a family or a sports team that provides for those needs
Mm,
will be more motivating for the child to then do what the adults want done in that situation. So if
mm,
you want kids to work hard on their math, you
mm,
want to make the math classroom a place where they believe they can succeed.
mm,
So the tasks are set up in a way that the kids can succeed,
mm,
that they can feel like they belong, so they are being treated with dignity and respect, and they have the opportunity to engage with their peers,
mm,
and that they have some sense of control, that they agree doing well in school is part of what they want to do. So
mm,
they're not being forced to do it.
mm,
And under that kind of situation,
mm,
when the teacher says, all right, now we're going to do math work, the students are likely to say, okay, and to do it. And they
mm,
will be motivated to do what the teacher wants them to do, or the coach wants them to do, or their family wants them to do, or
mm,
their friends want them to do. So that's one of the ways is that the context can support engagement or
mm,
it can undermine engagement. So if the teacher says, all right, today we're going to have a contest and we're going to see who can finish their math work
mm,
first.
mm,
Well, that's going to motivate some kids who
mm,
like to compete and win, and it's going to deter other kids who are worried about how well they'll perform. So they
mm,
will get very anxious. That will take up cognitive energy. They won't be able to work hard and focus their attention, and they won't do as well.
mm,
So this is where if you're a teacher or an employer, you need to be thinking about the characteristics of the people that
mm,
you want to motivate
mm,
in a class to do what you want them to do.
mm,
So that's one way to think about how the context has an effect.
mm,
And we've been able to show that environments, we also talked about environments that were supportive in these same kinds of ways.
mm,
When we talked about, we've done a lot of work on the junior high school transition and
mm,
why it was that so many children in the United States, at least, seemed to turn off to math and
mm,
become demotivated when they made the shift into junior high school.
mm,
And we felt that was because the environment, the math classes in the junior high schools were less likely to provide a supportive environment.
mm,
And then you have to think about, well, what's a supportive environment? And we've already said that DC and Ryan give three criteria.
mm,
It has to support success, it has to support feelings of belonging, and it has to support feelings of control. And
mm,
that if the teacher succeeds in creating that kind of environment, that increases the likelihood the students will stay in the environment. We
mm,
also believe that there are other ways that teachers can influence the students' motivation. So we talk a lot, for example, about utility value. And there
mm,
have now been a bunch of interventions
mm,
where the teacher has started asking the kids in the
mm.
class, the students, to reflect on how useful what they're learning is.
Okay, is it where you talk about how classroom experience shape expectancies and values?
Well, in a certain situation, yes, all of what we've been talking about is that. So the DC and Ryan, that will influence them. When we look at what we've been talking about, so what are the criteria for value and what are the criteria for expectancies? Then you
Mm,
want to think about how the environment, the
mm,
context, supports those beliefs. So
mm,
if you want the kids to think that what they're learning is useful, because
mm,
we know if they do, that will motivate them, then
mm,
you have to give them opportunities to
mm,
feel that it is useful. You have to tell them why it's useful. You have to let them think about why it's useful. And interventions that do that actually do have students do better.
mm,
So that would be a way that a teacher could help to do that in the classroom. The
mm,
teacher could also make it fun.
mm,
So intrinsic value or liking doing the task is very powerful. So if the
mm,
kids think they're going to enjoy it, they're more likely to want to do it. So the teacher or the employer or the sports coach can help to motivate kids by making it fun.
mm.
They can also, so go ahead, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about your experience, maybe based on the research you have been doing. So, do you think the kids uh, hear more from their parents, or they value what they hear from teachers more than what they hear from parents? So, I want to have that understanding.
Well, we don't know. I
Mm,
mean, that's impossible to tell. You could
mm,
ask a kid, but kids don't know.
mm,
So we know from social psychology that a lot of times people aren't good reporters about
mm,
what's motivating them, because a lot of what's motivating them is non-conscious, it's unconscious.
mm,
They're very good at telling you, I do it because I like it, because it's fun. But
mm,
they would be less likely to tell you, I do it because I want to become a doctor, or something like that, because they're not thinking about what they're doing in a classroom as
mm,
necessarily being motivated for something far into the future. So
mm,
I'm a developmental psychologist. I think
mm,
early on parents have a big impact because they're the most important socializers. And this
mm,
would include everybody in the home, not just parents. So siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles. How wide that circle is will vary by cultures.
mm,
But it's the first place that
mm,
influences kids.
mm,
And we know that the extent to which parents have confidence in their kids makes a difference. We
mm,
know, again, the extent to which the families give the kids something to do. So we would call this scaffolding. So they
mm,
help their child be successful. So
mm,
kids, you want kids to feel successful.
mm,
That fosters good motivation in general. So the family wants to be operate in a way that the child feels supported, feels loved, feels cared for,
mm,
and the child is given challenging tasks to do.
mm,
So, in that kind of environment, we think that early on, the children will explore their environment. They will
mm,
be motivated to explore their environment, and
mm,
exploring their environment will be reinforcing and will lead to motivated behavior to keep exploring their environment. So,
mm,
you could start at the most basic level. What gets 2-year-olds to do
mm,
something?
mm,
And we've done a lot of work on sort of what kinds of families have kids who look most motivated? What kinds of families have kids who want to do their very best?
mm,
And these tend to be families that are very caring, but also have very clear expectations for their kids. So they
mm,
expect them to do well. They tell them, I expect you to do well. They reward them when they do well, and they give them challenging tasks to do.
mm,
So if you look sort of at it looks like early on in life, children are motivated
mm,
to explore their environment, to try new things, and to
mm,
get better. That we
mm,
come equipped with
mm,
those desires.
mm,
And families that support those desires are laying the groundwork for the
mm,
kids to believe they can do it, to
mm,
want to do their very best,
mm,
and to want to cooperate with
mm,
the socializers in their world who are
mm.
helping to teach them what they need to know.
So in that case, parents and family, they can shape children's motivation.
Yes. And they can do it best by
mm,
having clear expectations,
mm,
good scaffolding, so they keep giving the child increasingly difficult tasks to
mm,
do,
mm,
and they reinforce the child's efforts and their
mm,
successes.
mm,
So that would be sort of the beginning origins of good achievement,
mm,
of high achievement motivation.
mm,
So, I was in Ghana. We've talked before about I lived in
mm,
Ghana for 2 years,
mm,
and I would look at the kids, the very young kids. They were very well. I taught high school and secondary school in Ghana, and the kids who came to secondary school were very motivated, much
mm,
more motivated than American kids are to do well in school. And so
mm,
I was interested in what families were doing. So I would go into the village, or I would go home with my students, and I would watch what was happening in the compounds where the children lived.
mm,
And you saw exactly this. First of all, in most Ghanaian homes, there would be many adults, mostly women, so mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, who were
mm,
there to support the child. So the
mm,
child would uh, try to do things to help out in the family. So, for example, I would see families going to get water from the river or from the water spigot in town, and
mm,
even the little kids would carry cans on their heads. So
mm,
everybody was expected to do the task. So
mm,
even 2 year olds were expected to do the task,
mm,
but they were given a very small can, so the parents were scaffolding the task at the
mm,
level that they could be successful.
mm,
And and the child was expect. Nobody said you're too young, you're too little, you can't do this. They
mm,
said, okay, we're going to get water. Everybody's going to help,
mm,
and this is your can, and we
mm,
will put it on your head and all the way up. I mean, you come from Africa, so the women carry 5 gallon hands on the top of their head, and the
mm,
kids, as they get younger, carry increasingly smaller containers.
mm,
These are in families in the villages that don't have running water in the homes. But this
mm,
was just a way that you could see the family laying the groundwork for the
mm.
child being motivated to do what the family needed.
Yeah.
And and uh, and the family would then, as soon as the child could get the small can of water home full, they would
Mm,
give them a bigger can. So they
mm,
wouldn't say, all right, you've done that, now you're done. No, they would give the next level of task. So they
mm,
would continue to have high expectations, and the kids knew that if when they learned to do this, they would
mm,
get a harder task. They would
mm,
get a more demanding task. And
mm,
so they grew up, and everyone loved them. So they loved learning. They loved being part of the group.
mm,
So that I think was the reason that the Ghanaian children were so motivated in school. Going
mm,
to school was an honor. It was seen as something that it was a gift to go to school. So
mm,
they were going to go to school, and they were going to work very hard at it.
mm,
In the United States, that's not the way it is. Some kids have that background. They learn to read early. They're very interested in reading. Their parents and their teachers make sure they give them more and more challenging books, or more and more challenging math problems, or more and more challenging science problems. And the
mm,
kids are motivated to do well in school.
mm,
So I think that's what our data shows. That's what intervention studies show. It also fits with DC and Ryan's self-determination theory. It fits with classical reinforcement theory.
mm,
What you want to do is to give kids the opportunity to be successful,
mm,
and then challenge them more. So
mm,
keep challenging them, and so that they know they can always get better. They can
mm,
work hard and they can get better. And when they get better, they'll get a more difficult task. And
mm,
that's seen as a good thing. So that's a success. So I think that's what happens in the families when it
mm,
works.
mm,
And then they go to school, and if they're in a place that has good teachers,
mm,
the good teachers will do that as well. They will know their material, and they will be able to scaffold the learning in the same kind of way. They will start simple and they
mm,
will get gradually more and more complicated, and they
mm,
will make sure that every child is succeeding.
mm,
So that you want to keep the level of success high,
mm.
but the difficulty also continuing to accelerate.
Yeah, it's a reminder to me when you came up with example of kids from Ghana. I'm from Rwanda.
Yeah.
It's a recall. It's a reminder to me when I was a kid how I used to carry maybe 20 liters of Jacquelynne.
Yeah. Huh?
So then I have to go to fetch water in the
Yes.
morning before I go to school. Then when I came back from school, I have to do the same. But one word from my mom, encouragement. Oh, you did a good job. You did a good job. I know my mom is going to be happy for what I did. That was
Yes.
encouragement. I sometimes do two times
Yeah.
going back. So
Yeah.
I like the experience you
Yeah.
brought.
Yeah.
You
And I think that's a perfect example of when the system is working right,
mm,
that's the way it goes. And the adults have the job of scaffolding and
mm,
of providing increasingly difficult tasks. So
mm,
I think that's basically how a successful environment works. Now,
mm,
there are lots of ways that it can go wrong.
mm,
There's lots of ways that moms can get nervous, can get anxious. They can be stressed themselves and not able to pay attention and give the positive feedback for engaging in the task. They can yell at the child when the child makes a mistake. I mean, in
mm,
Ghana, I never saw a mom yell at her child.
mm,
Never. Even
mm,
if they spilled all the water.
mm,
Mom would say, "Okay, you tried hard. Next time you'll do better."
mm,
And the kids, and they could see that because they could see their older siblings
mm,
doing better. So
mm,
so they were in an environment where it was pretty easy to see, well,
mm,
I'm going to have to carry a bigger can next year. I,
mm,
I I better learn how to do this,
mm,
and that will make my family happy. And that
mm,
will make me happy because I'm getting better at it. So it
mm,
both makes the social world around me
mm,
happy. It also makes me happy.
mm,
And I could see them learning soccer, so they would teach themselves soccer. And from a very early age, the kids would, in Ghana, they used grapefruit. So they would get grapefruit off of the trees, and the
mm,
and the little kids would kick the grapefruit around for a ball. And
mm,
they would start at a very young age. And they would do this, when they had time. And
mm,
they would be especially likely to do it if their older sib was doing it. So they
mm,
would watch the kids older than them do it, and then they would start to do it. So they would imitate.
mm,
And again, if it was set up so that they could succeed, they got positive feedback. Nobody laughed at them if they did something. If they kicked the grapefruit and it broke into pieces, they would say, "Well, that's what happens. Here, get another grapefruit. Now do it again." Or if
mm,
they could afford it, they would get a ball, and they would get a small ball and then gradually get bigger balls, so
mm.
that the child would gradually get better. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's basic. It's not a hard concept of what lays the groundwork for children and then adults to want to be successful, to
Mm,
want to learn more, and to want to master what is important to master within their culture.
mm. So even when I think, Dr. Eccles, it's amazing for you to have uh, West culture experience, US experience, and also the time 2 years you spend in Ghana, because having that understanding of how culture influence what people expect and value, and how culture can shape the option people see as possible. It's
Yes,
amazing.
it is. And I would have had a very different orientation had I not been to Ghana.
Yeah.
So the difference. So I went back to the United States and taught in middle school, which was grade 7 in the United States. And
Mm,
it was not fun for me. It was not fun for the kids.
Mm.
Most kids didn't like being there, and
Mm.
I didn't like teaching them. And that was so different than in Ghana.
Because of
So
your exposure.
so I loved teaching in Ghana because the kids loved learning. So
Mm.
we had a lot of fun
Mm.
and we learned things together. I learned about them, they learned about me, and I helped them learn about math and science.
Mm.
And it was a natural, wonderful situation. So that that's what I would say about that. So I think had I just been in the United States, I would
Mm.
have been worried about how I would have wondered what happened to the kids' motivation.
Mm.
And I might have, so many American teachers will say, why aren't the kids motivated?
Mm.
Well, in Ghana, you would not ask why the kids aren't motivated because they were motivated.
Mm.
And I don't know if this is still true or not, but um,
Generally in Africa, because when
yeah,
you talk about your experience in Ghana, it was
yeah,
the
sure.
right
It's very much
academic.
like other countries in Africa too. So there's something about the way extended families work that
Mm.
I think is very good for fostering
Mm.
a desire to do well,
Mm.
because you have multiple adults. So if one adult isn't feeling well, they're not going to be the only one that can provide the support for the kids,
Mm.
and it can be shared. So even though it's hard,
Mm.
growing up is hard in Ghana, but
Mm.
it's still much more supportive of positive motivation.
Mm. I know you talk about also soccer or some examples. So in your theory, you talk about socializers, how uh, how socializers can influence motivation. So who are socializers, first
Well,
of
socializers, usually when people think of it, they think of parents and teachers, but they can be anybody. In fact, they can even be AI. They can be the television. They can be books.
all?
Socializers are simply the world outside of the person we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
who are going to affect them, impact on them.
Mm.
And early on, but siblings will do it too. So siblings can have an impact. So like the example I gave of who wants to go on and be a great athlete. Well,
Mm.
often an older sibling who is already doing that will be the role model. So we talk about role models. So
Mm.
socializers first and foremost provide role models. So
Mm.
they're examples of
Mm.
what the culture values.
Mm.
And so the child learns first by just watching
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
by seeing what's going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
Parents and those can be the television set. So if you watch in the United States, we have Sesame Street is for young kids. It's designed to teach them about things, but it does it in a way that it uses the same principles that I told you. It starts simple. It gradually, as the kids watch it more, they learn more and more complex things. So Sesame Street increases in difficulty, so that you can have your kid watch simple Sesame Street or more complicated Sesame Street as the child gets older.
Mm.
Um, Peers can do this, so peers can and older siblings can do this easily.
Mm.
In the U.S., a lot of kids watch television. Well, that's what they've already said Sesame Street. When they go to school, now what you've got is teachers as being major socializers, but
Mm.
still older kids are socializers. Anybody that the child looks up to and
Mm.
interacts with the child can help to motivate the child.
Mm. Mm. Wow, that's really interesting. So, when you talk about, let us think about opportunities and constraint. How do opportunities and constraint in the environment shape motivation?
Well, so let me give an example. Okay, so opportunities
Mm.
are what a child can learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if it and you have to think about the world the child is in. So what things are available, easily available in their world?
Mm.
So
Mm.
those provide the opportunities to learn. I
Mm.
I, I never learned to play soccer
Mm.
because my parents didn't provide me with soccer balls. I never saw a woman play soccer when I was growing up.
Was not available to you.
It was not available to me. So I didn't have the opportunity to become
Mm,
motivated to do soccer. That's why I always think about motivation as being specific to a
mm,
specific task or activity. I don't
mm,
think about kids being motivated or not motivated. They're motivated to do some things and not motivated to do other things.
mm,
So, and they learn as they're growing up through the opportunities that are available to them, what things they ought to, what specific things they ought to be wanting to learn,
mm,
and what their parents want them to learn, and what their teachers want them to learn.
mm,
Um, Barriers are the absence of the opportunity is a barrier.
mhm,
So you're not going to learn something you're never exposed to.
mm,
And the richer your family is, the
mm,
more they can provide you with lots of opportunities.
mm,
So that's one of the reasons why wealth becomes a very strong determinant of what a person will try, what they will try to learn. So
mm,
because you learn what's around you,
mm,
somebody has to give you opportunities. And if
mm,
you don't have opportunities, those are barriers.
mm,
There are also cultures have ideas about what is the right thing to do. So here, for example, would be gender. So they
mm,
would think, well, it's good for boys to learn soccer, but not girls.
mm,
So the culture will believe that. So when a girl, well, so they have to give a Christmas present
mm,
or a Hanukkah present, or or just a gift for graduating. Be more likely to give a boy a soccer ball than a girl.
mm,
So the boys will get opportunities, but the gender roles will be a barrier to the girl getting opportunities to learn to play soccer. Now,
mm,
that happens in classrooms too. So many cultures believe that men are better at math than females are, and that it's okay if girls don't learn math. It's not okay if boys don't learn math. So they will provide more opportunities for a boy to learn math.
mm,
They'll provide more. So in Ghana, in my school, there were more boys that went to secondary school than girls
mm,
because the assumption in Ghana at that time was that the boys would go on to college or would finish high school and to go into certain kind of jobs that required high school, whereas the
mm,
girls would stay home and get married and take care of children.
mm,
So those roles, those sex roles, can
mm,
be a barrier. And they
mm,
are a barrier because
mm,
the boys are prevented from deciding they want to stay home and take care of children. And
mm,
girls are prevented from thinking they want to go on and be an engineer.
mm,
So that would be an example of a barrier.
mm,
Um, Having a bad teacher
mm,
who doesn't know math very well and teaches you the wrong things. And the
mm,
next year you go and you are expected to do things that you weren't taught.
mm.
That could be a barrier
Yeah.
because you weren't adequately prepared for the next most challenging material. So then you start failing and you all of a sudden say, "Oh, wait a minute, why am I failing? Maybe I'm not any good at this and maybe I shouldn't try to learn it." So
Mm,
that would be a barrier.
mm,
And that happens a lot in classrooms. Teachers, you have a child, if a child doesn't have the kind of personality that fits well into
mm,
the learning environment. So you've got a child who's very active, wants to run around, and the teacher says, sit in your chair.
mm,
That can be a barrier because the kid becomes nervous and anxious and they've got to give up. They need to run around to get rid of energy. Well,
mm,
they're in an environment that doesn't fit
mm,
their personality or their style of living. So there are lots of things that can be barriers and lots of things that can be opportunities. And you
mm,
always have to be thinking about so you need to be thinking about, well, if you find a child that's not no doesn't want to do math, then
mm,
you need to think back what could have led that child to not wanting to do math.
mm,
What was it in their life that
mm,
was a barrier to their getting engaged in learning?
mm,
And sometimes that's lack of exposure.
mm,
Sometimes that is lack of supportive teaching.
mm,
Sometimes that's somebody teasing them for doing well at something that they don't think they should do. So a girl who started doing really well in math class, and the kids start teasing her for being like a boy,
mm,
or a boy deciding he wants to be something that someone says that's not what boys do and you shouldn't do that. You're a
mm,
sissy. So there's
mm,
lots of ways that the culture gives up messages
mm,
as to what is an appropriate thing to learn.
mm,
So I once headed a panel that was trying to think about what was wrong with kindergarten to grade six education.
mm,
And one of the ways they framed that question was kids usually start, American kids usually start kindergarten very excited
mm,
about going to school.
mm,
But by the fifth grade, many kids don't like it.
mm,
So what did the school do to kill their motivation?
mm,
So rather than blaming the kid and say, why is the kid unmotivated? We should look back at what were the barriers, what were the punishments
mm,
that the child experienced that made them not like math
mm,
or not want to do math.
mm,
Uh, and so that leads to a lot of interventions. How can you change the school? How can you change the family in a way that will support more math? So there's some wonderful studies with parents, for example.
mm,
This actually relates to your dissertation.
mm,
So if you wanted young students to be
mhm,
very interested in using the cell phones as a
mm,
way of gathering information that could help them increase the productivity of the family farming,
mm,
you would want to make sure that in school they had the opportunity to learn that.
mm, mm,
And they then lead the way. So the
mm,
young kids, if you tell them, oh, look, there's this great, they love to play with phones. So you
mm,
can say, oh, you can use your phone to get information. Look
mm,
at this. And you would start getting them to use their phone to do very simple things.
mm,
And
mm,
you would train them into the habit and the
mm,
feeling of competence to use their phone to gather information. So
mm,
you would have to break the task down
mm,
into what would it be like to learn it in
mm,
a simple progressive way,
mm,
and how could you get that into the family and into the school.
mm,
And then as they got older, they would then be able to be the teachers
mm,
of the younger kids.
mm,
So that, you studied what were the barriers to
mm,
someone using a new technology.
mm, mm,
Well, you could think about it the same way. So what are those barriers? And if we want people to do it, then we have to start with kids. Well, you
mm,
don't have to start with, you could start with adults, but you're going to find the kids learn it much faster
yeah,
than
yeah,
the adults because
mm,
they're not having to unlearn something. They're just getting this as a new thing to learn, and oh boy, is that fun. So
mm,
it will be easier to teach the kids and they will learn it much faster.
mm. Wow, wow. So you talk about also the context and identity. I know you are talking about how family, culture, and school influence who people believe they are. So can you again talk about how context and shape identity specifically?
Well, through the same processes. So identities, okay. So an identity is when you have internalized these beliefs.
Mm,
So if you're in a culture and they tell you this is important,
mm,
initially you will believe that because people you care about tell you that.
mm,
It becomes an identity when you internalize it. When
mm,
you say, yes, and I believe that too.
mm,
Now, we don't understand that process very well.
mm,
We know that it happens. We
mhm,
know that the brain is able to reinforce itself
mm,
so that as you get older and you continue to get praised for
mm,
uh, being a certain way,
mm,
you will start to see yourself in that way. It's very much like learning language. So
mm,
I'll go back. Kids learn language without instruction.
mm,
So they internalize the language. They're making categories in their head.
mm,
They're hearing sounds. They then have to first they have to learn, well, what is a sound? What is a
mm,
word? When they first hear language, they don't hear words like we do. They hear a stream of noise.
mm,
And they have to just, when you learn a new language, you have to first learn what is a word.
mm,
When someone's talking to you, what are the words that exist? So you
mm,
first have to learn that they're words. And then you
mm,
have to learn how those words get put together. And
mm,
that comes from the brain being very, very good at developing categories.
mm,
So we come already equipped with that through evolution. That has made us very good at doing that. And I
mm,
assume that identity internalization is the same process.
mm, mm,
We see ourselves doing this, and soon we say, I am that kind of person.
mm,
And then they start to say, and it's good I am that kind of person,
mm,
because we want to put a value judgment on it. So that again looks like it's part of the way our brain works. We
mm,
learn that what is good,
mm,
provided somebody doesn't punish us.
mm,
So under normal circumstances, that will be seen as good.
mm,
So I see identity as happening in the same kind of way. It's the internalization.
mm,
Now, if someone tries to force an internalization on somebody, you'll
mm,
get rebellion.
mm,
So that's where autonomy comes in. And
mm,
that's in DC and Ryan's theory. They
mm,
talk about the importance of a person believing they have
mm,
autonomy, that
mm,
they believe they have the choice
mm,
to internalize this or not.
mm,
And if they get messages that they're going to be punished for
mm,
not doing this, they
mm,
will start to question and say, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Who's making me do this? Do I really want to do this?
mhm,
And we want people to ask those questions, because
mm,
once they can say to themselves, well, I'm doing it because I want to do it. I agree. I think this is important.
mm,
I now want to do it, and it is who I want to be.
mm,
That is a big cognitive shift.
mm, mm,
And I think it happens pretty naturally, but it can be wiped out. It can be undone
mm,
by the world being too controlling.
mm, mm.
So we haven't looked at that very much in our study, but DC and Ryan have, and they're very interested in this process of internalization.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So I think always when we meet, we have many things to talk about. But before maybe we conclude our session today, what is the most important idea people should understand about context and motivation?
Well, there's not a single, but I'll give you two.
Yeah.
They need to understand that the context tells a person what's important.
Yeah.
So the context in the moment defines in part, what you can do.
Mm,
In terms of socialization, what you
mm,
want to make sure happens is that
mm,
the individual gets the opportunity to learn over time in an environment that is supportive,
mm,
um, is challenging,
mm,
and gives you a sense of autonomy.
mm, mm, mm,
And the teachers or parents should not say a child is unmotivated. They
mm,
should say, what is the child motivated to do, and how do I build on that?
mm, mm. Wow, that's amazing. So, Dr. Eccles, thank you so much. It's amazing always when I meet you, when we have this kind of conversation. I learn a lot from you. So, thank you so much.
My pleasure. You help me a lot, because clarifying in my mind an answer to your question is very useful to me.
Yeah, I think I have been asking you a lot of questions.
Yes.
So, see you
Thank you.
next time to the next uh,
Okay.